week of the Seth and Jack show. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I keep doing that. We're on the crux of the morning, the afternoon. Hello, Jack. How was your weekend, my friend?
Very good, Seth. You?
Exceedingly well. I keep hearing reminders from everybody at the CDC and the WHO and everybody on my television screen in the morning, which is really now a computer screen like everybody else in the world. This new COVID variant is going to compel you to wear not just one, but two masks. So now I'm going to have all sorts of opportunities to not wear masks in public because much like the rest of the week, I spent the weekend at home, not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just, cooking, preparing food, vacuuming, sealing vacuum bags, going to war with people. I'm at war with so many different people. It's ridiculous.
I know, Seth. Didn't one of them say that you couldn't hold down a job?
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, the same one that, by the way, we're not naming names because I'm not going to open myself up for that kind of litigation. But I am currently at war with exactly the kind of European expats that you should be at war with if you have a moral backbone. Let's just
You're talking Euro trash here, right?
I'm talking the ones with the garish bordello aesthetic. Anyway, I'm at war with exactly the right people. I think you need to be cultivating an enemies list if you're going to advocate for this country and defending it. It's not just enough that you have an enemies list that includes Trumpists. You got to have an enemies list that includes Trumpist sympathizers as well. Trumpists in sheep's clothing, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happened then. And, the irony about this particular individual is I worked for that company while I was working for rehabbing a property and for sale. And doing a great job. So I'd wake up and start work at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. It was a live-in thing. I was on the site of this hospitality place, and I was there, up and at it by 7 o'clock in the morning. And then around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd go to this place and I'd work until about 1 o'clock at night. And that was 7 days a week. So I was working, I guess that's kind of like, getting 5 hours of sleep, 19-hour days times 7 at some point for weeks on end because they needed coverage because they had fired a manager or something like that. So I ended up slaving for this person with this gargantuan sense of entitlement. So anyway, I'm currently at war with exactly the right people. Former Nazis, current Nazis, other kind of Europeans that infuriate us all. It's a great and growing list. It's fabulous.
How is the trash in the driveway thing going?
Really well. The district attorney's office asked me to write them a letter, which I did, explaining everything. Local police chief doing a great job. Finally, tracking it down. Apparently, it's going well, and I'll have some. A news item, something that Biden has done that infuriates conservatives. I was watching Ann Applebaum on MSNBC this morning on Morning Joe, which is absolutely lacking Joe for some reason this morning. It's Mika there all by herself. And I was watching Ann Applebaum, and the question came up, what do we do? How do we coexist with these Republicans? How do we coexist with people that can't express themselves electorally without destroying the country? And she said, change the subject. She says, when I've studied it in other parts of the world, changing the subject from what they want to talk about to different issues of governance is the way to do it. So I
Mhm.
thought, well, that makes a good deal of logical sense. That was Anne Applebaum. She wrote Twilight in the Twilight of Democracy.
Um, New Yorker article about Mitch McConnell.
Wow, that was great. Um, It was written by Jane Mayer, and she is a smart lady. She essentially spent weeks talking with people about, well, how does Donald Trump um, get along with the other members of the Republican Party? What is the um, what is the method by which Mitch McConnell navigated his relationship with Donald Trump, and how does Mitch McConnell feel about Donald Trump now? And the answer was um, he hates Donald Trump, and the relationship, ironically, was as transactional as Donald Trump's experiences in governance were transactional. And that Mitch McConnell, this is the article that you were talking with me about over the weekend. Mitch McConnell's only concern is winning and power and being majority and Senate majority leader. So he despises Trump for losing Georgia, the two Senate seats to Warnock and Ossoff, where Loeffler and Perdue lost. But the interesting thing about that is that he was actually scared that there was going to be some sort of revolt, that Trump would, um, throw the wheels off the cart, because it's pretty obvious that he hates Republicans too, and just say, hey, screw you on the way out the door. I'm going to tell my supporters not to vote in the Georgia Senate special election, which is kind of like what it felt like. That's what they did anyway. I mean, a lot of people just didn't show up.
Oh, there's no question that without Trump's interference, they would have won the Senate.
Yeah,
There's no question. He
yeah,
literally sabotaged it. And poor Mitch. And so now he's trying to place himself in a position that if the Republicans retake the Senate, he will once again be their leader. Now, tell me about this guy McCarthy. I don't know that much about him.
you
He's
have
a
Kevin
Democrat,
McCarthy,
right? Yeah.
the House leader, Kevin McCarthy, the
Yep.
House Minority Leader at this point, Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is not a never Trumper. Kevin McCarthy is he's like a weatherman. He sticks his finger up in the wind and sees which way the Republican electorate is blowing. And he started out by saying, "Hey, the insurrection and the storming of the Capitol, Trump bears some blame." And then he said it again. And then yesterday, he goes out and he says, "No, I was only referring to Trump's response to it, not his incitement of it." And this just means really good news for anybody who's not a Trumpist. The really good news is that the GOP is still terrified of the Trump base. But as long as the GOP is operating as if it's terrified by the Trump base, the GOP cannot be an ongoing concern politically.
Interesting. Now, Trump's agenda, of course, is to start the Patriot Party, and then wield and threaten, which he's already doing, any Republican who doesn't agree with him on the Stop the Steal in financially contributing to their opponents in the primary.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how effective that's going to be honest with you.
I don't know how much power he has anymore, Seth, and I think every day it wins.
Well, Jane Mayer was on the TV this morning talking about how she's seen recent polling that suggests that 20%, or excuse me, I'm sorry, 30% of the Trump base has bailed on him.
Wow.
Have you heard anything like that?
I haven't, but that's an interesting statistic.
It kind of is. I mean, and now, you got it's all the wheels of the cart are coming off for this guy, Jack, because he is now put in a position where he has no ability to express his outrage and to counter the messaging that's coming in. His most recent target, Anthony Fauci, he article in thehillreporter.com, Trump frustrated, powerless to lash out at Dr. Fauci without social media. And apparently he's watching, spending time watching news clips of Fauci and Bricks making the rounds on TV, talking about how there's no belief in science from these people, how it was as ugly as everybody thought it was, how, Fauci goes on TV and says, well, I'm really, relieved not to have to deal with this shit anymore, except if he bilks 15%. Yeah, so going back to Donald Trump primarying everybody, those are those rubes that gave him money. They gave it under some pretty shady circumstances. He's going to pocket a user fee.
You know what? It's interesting that Hawley now is saying how corporations have turned on him. I mean, which is an interesting observation when you think, and also there was something about Zuckerberg today and Facebook. They're turning over, let me see where this is. Yeah, hands over user data to help FBI arrest Capitol rioters. Now, isn't this interesting? When Apple, if you compare this to Apple not being willing to unlock somebody's iPhone, remember that guy in LA, that criminal? And there was a big deal a couple of years ago. And now Zuckerberg is more than happy to hand over user data to the FBI.
Really?
Yes. Now, isn't that interesting? And I have a feeling that because the left has the support of social media, it's almost a guaranteed win.
Not only that, but the language of social media and the language of technology, the platform on which we all have these conversations, is actually written, the language itself. Even the picture that you and I are watching ourselves on now, or the way the screen is set up and the way we're interacting with it, that language that is part of the visual language that we spent last week talking about, and part of the digital citizenship that we advocated for on Friday, is a curriculum for our children in schools, as well as a civics curriculum. That language, as you rightly point out, is actually written by people that don't share a worldview, by and large, with conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to speak a language that was developed by people they disagree with.
So the beauty of this is it's not just the language of the left the Republicans point to as being unfair. It is the ownership of the media.
Yeah.
I mean,
your ability to express yourself.
Yes, and then the ability to cut off the scumbag in Miami, right?
Yeah.
And all these people from social media. That's incredible power, Seth. That's more power than the federal government has.
And then, Jack, there's also analog technology. Here we go. You see that?
I can't.
Okay.
What does it say? Oh, yes. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, I love that.
Here we go. Worst president ever.
Oh,
This
flying.
this is fun because this is what the people at Mar-a-Lago who still belong to that club are seeing on the beach as they sit and sunbathe. That's the imagery. That's like I'll tell you how effective that is. The aforementioned New York Jets had a general manager who was kind of really not cut out for the job, and some fans took out a one of these planes, and they flew a banner over the stadium where the owner was, "Fire John Idzik," because of his incompetence. And this is the kind of thing that gets legs. It gets legs, and it's hard to make it go away. It's you can imagine Trump just sitting there in Mar-a-Lago, watching the news, being furious that he can't fire Dr. Fauci, being furious that he can't counter, or say the words, "I tried to fire Dr. Fauci," or "I should have fired Dr. Fauci when I had the chance."
So imagine these three other golfers that are out with him. Imagine these guys, what they have to fucking put up with. I mean, I'm sorry. Do you think they pay $200,000 a year to join that club?
Yeah, apparently they're quitting like crazy.
Which is
apparently the members of the club are like heading for the hills now.
I love that. And I was talking to Seth the other day, folks, about Seth and I starting an alternate club in Miami, not too far from this location, and we'd see if we could get donations. We're not really sure what we would call it yet. So if you have some ideas, it would be great. And we would literally suck into all these people who have nowhere to go now.
So, yeah, it's kind of like the all the members of the Ghastly Obscenities Party that are left in Florida.
The basket of deplorables. That's what we should call the club. Neon, Euro trash taste. It's perfect. It's perfect, Seth.
The basket of deplorables.
Yes. Can you imagine the logo, the blinking neon sign, dinner theater, golf at 8?
What are you going to lose? What are you going to lose, Jack? Jack Churchill, candidate for office in anywhere.
Dade County.
Yeah. Jack, you're a Dade County. You're the Dade County commissioner. Everybody knows who you are, right? Let me ask you this: what could you possibly lose? What votes as a candidate could you possibly lose by calling people a basket of deplorables now?
Yeah, true.
Is there any crossover? Is there any independent voter that's going to make their decision based on you using that phrase and accurately describing the people who stormed our Capitol, those deplorable people?
Well, you have a couple of things going on there. Number one, I have no credibility to lose. Okay, so that's a moot point. And secondly, you're absolutely right. I mean, Hillary, it was a big political mistake. It's like Obama and the guns and the Bibles in Pennsylvania. But it was a huge political mistake, but that doesn't mean it wasn't 100% correct.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, it was as much of a political mistake as any other offhanded comment that gets caught on mic that politics is, you get into a room and then you make your public statements and then you take off that hat, your candidate hat, and then you go and you talk to your supporters who are writing checks.
Yes.
And they want and need to hear certain things from you that you can't say while you're wearing your public hat.
Well, that's what killed Romney. That's what killed Romney's campaign.
Exactly.
And so here's something for us here because I love this, Seth. You want to run that up?
The junior picture?
Yes, former Estonian president. Keep in mind, Estonia compares Trump Jr. to exceptionally small-brained fish?
I actually take issue with this. I take issue with this because it's not appropriate for sentient beings, humans, to insult other sentient beings. How do you think the small brain fish feel about this?
That's true. Now, what I want to point out, and this is, we were talking about the enormous advantage to traveling and living in countries, other countries, because it's not just a language thing, it's a cultural thing. I
Yeah.
worked with a Hungarian director who once referred to an agency producer as shrewder than a Turkish fisherman's wife. Okay. And
Oh,
that was a Hungarian insult, but it's something you would never hear in the United States, and it demonstrates so much of the culture. When the Estonian president said exceptionally small brain fish, that's something an American couldn't come up with. It's a
no.
cultural thing from that culture, and it teaches you about the culture, and it teaches you yet something else about Trump Jr.
Yeah, it does. It does. But, he's never going to have that thriving career in Estonia that we were thinking he was going to.
Yes, yes. He tried Saudi Arabia. He tried Ukraine. It's just tried Trump Tower, but he left the meeting early.
There's,
Uh, Boy, what's his life going to look like? What a
um,
maroon!
it's what a maroon. Yeah. Um, yeah, I was thinking the other day, I was talking with you on the phone. We were talking about, what European perspective is, what European perception of what's going on here. I was thinking all the way back to World War II, and I was thinking about the entire U.S. electorate and the kind of uh, emotional trauma that we've been through. Anybody who is not a Trump supporter, that kind of wartime footing, the emotional wartime footing that we've been on. And I was reminded of the experience of the German people after World War II, when they were faced with their imminent defeat. No questions asked. They're sitting in the middle of what they consider to be a real shit sandwich. They've got invading Soviets coming from the east, and they've got angry Americans coming from the west, and British and French, everybody else that they'd fucked with. And the Germans, who had the experience of having Russians take over their territory, understood very quickly what the Russian mentality was like. You're going to be paid back in spades for Stalingrad, for all your sieges, and it's going to hurt. And they were absolutely brutal and ruthless, specifically the rape of tens of thousands of German women as the Russians made their way west. Coming from the east are what, in retrospect, now appears to be the saviors of Western civilization, saving those same Germans from their own stupidity. And it occurred to me that those people had a choice of which worldview they wanted to embrace. And not just for 1944 until the next election cycle in 1948, right? No, they wanted to throw their lot in with how it's going to be for the rest of time until I die in Germany. And they had a choice between the barbarian rapists or Americans. And they chose to flee west. Those that could fled to the Americans as quickly as they possibly could. That is the American voter today. We're faced with a Republican horde that would rather shred our Constitution, storm our Capitol, and literally hang people that don't agree with their glorious leader, rather than vote with civilized people. So when people say, hey, what's 2022 and 2024 and 2026 going to look like electorally? I think that this civil war in the Republican Party is going to just flatten everyone. It's going to flatten everyone in the Republican Party, my man.
Let me.
This civil war that they're fighting is going to pay dividends. And I'm just one last thing. Let me get it out of my head. We talked about a Lincoln Party or a Lincoln Party caucus last week. And I want to talk about that in this context, because I think you're exactly the kind of person that will be able to shed some light on this. Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you, Seth. The thing is, I don't agree with your analogy for a very big reason.
Go ahead.
The Germans understood what lay east and what lay west. Americans don't. And that's a big, big difference. They are not aware, okay, of what this berserker horde really represented.
Oh, brilliant phrase. Brilliant phrase.
Thank you. But what do you think of that idea? The Germans were well aware. It was being shown to them every day what the Russians would do.
I'm fascinated by that take. I am absolutely fascinated by that take, because what you're saying is it wasn't enough. What you're saying is it wasn't enough. There's still plausible deniability on some side. And what I'm saying is that the technology that we're surrounded by makes that statement, it wasn't enough, less impactful. I think we're thinking with our watching television and listening to news radio voices, and people who are coming of majority now are seeing the results of that nonstop on through the technology that made it happen in the first place. And they're saying, I think that they're saying, well, that's an existential threat for me on the one side. Republicans equal Russia circa 1944.
Okay, I want to regress to a conversation you and I had a week ago, Seth. Remember when I said that it's all a question of optics? If every day you knew there were 4,000 or 5,000 Americans dying, you had an iconography, you had a visual that looked like the World Trade Center. Every morning you would see the World Trade Center, which in its totality didn't kill as many people as COVID is, a lot of it because of Trump. If you had the ability to translate that fact from just a person on a ventilator in a bed to the coming down of the World Trade Center twice, because that's about the numbers we're talking about here every day, it could have had an impact. But because you couldn't attach yourself to that visual, it had very little power, particularly in the tiny little Republican brain. And that is the problem. They needed something spectacular to be able to visualize something spectacular, to be able to understand the problem. And we didn't have it.
Here you now demonstrate the value of your observations of last week regarding the visual language within which these things are all contextualized. Yes. This is like a way for you to say one death is a tragedy, 5 million deaths is a statistic.
Yes. Yeah,
because
exactly.
we can't wrap our brains around the impact of those 5 million deaths, but we can certainly, mourn for Aunt Lil.
Who
took care of us.
Right. Now, I think it was in the Peter Principle, he gave an example that was wonderful. He said the town committee has 2 items on the agenda. The first one is a bicycle rack outside of the courthouse. It can take 15 bicycles. All of them understand the concept of a bicycle rack. They understand that maybe the price should be between this and this. So they argue about it for a couple of weeks. The other item on the agenda is the nuclear power plant down the road. Since since none of them understand nuclear power, the $2 billion project gets
Stamped.
stamped in about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and that's a perfect analogy.
Do you remember from the article that you were? It's interesting you should say that, because earlier you were talking about Kevin McCarthy. And do you remember in the article that we were just talking about by Jane Mayer in the New Yorker, the part of the article that said that, as a matter of fact, I think I clipped it, Jack, and I can put it on the screen. Hold on a sec. Let me see if this is it. I think Mitch McConnell's trying to have it both ways. Yes. Stevens told me he absolutely doesn't want to impeach or convict Trump. It would split his base and cause members of his caucus to face primary challengers. Stevens contended that McConnell, by signaling his openness to impeachment without committing to convicting Trump, was trying to avoid a meltdown of the Republican Party. Stevens likened McConnell to the top engineer at Chernobyl, who, after the power plant malfunctioned, thought that he could micromanage a nuclear disaster. He tried to take the rods out, Stevens added. If he really wanted to make an impeachment conviction, he'd have done the trial the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it interesting that now we're talking about a small town not understanding the implications of a meltdown because that's the way they think.
Mm-hmm.
And that level of intellectual processing and competence from a place that we usually grudgingly admire,
Mm-hmm.
Mitch McConnell's abilities.
Imagine this town committee, this board of selectmen, okay, as the average Republican voter, who are just not able or to extrapolate what the ultimate effect and goal of Trumpism is, which is just like the Third Reich. And the only reason it didn't get there, because there were enough checks and balances for Trump not to kill the Jews or the liberals or the little brown people or the black people. If those had not been there, we would be in the middle of the Third Reich right now.
Yep. Aren't you kind of thrilled? Aren't you kind of thrilled at the unstated nature of the fabulous victory that our republic has just experienced?
And you know why people don't understand how much of a victory it is?
Because
they never for the same reason that they could never extrapolate what the end goal was. So they don't understand the depth of the victory because they don't understand the potential that it had.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it, I was just thinking this morning, we owe it to ourselves. And I put up a picture of the article in case anybody sees it, why McConnell dumped Trump, by Jane Mayer. It's interesting, Jack. If we collectively ask Republicans any question at all, hey Martha, if we ask Republicans any question at all, that we should have two questions, and I wrote them down. The first question that I would ask any Republican at this point, because really there's no one that should be allowed to get off the hook. We should be engaging. We shouldn't be, putting on our kid gloves and not challenging these people that we live with politically. And if we were allowed to go out in public, I think we would be more. Question number one, Mr. or Mrs. Republican, can you define for me what the GOP, what the ghastly obscenities party represents? Just tell me in your own words, like I'm a 3-year-old and you're explaining to me what GOP stands for now. Could you explain that to me? And the second question would be, taking that to its full manifestation, what does GOP governance result in? In other words, if you had your way, what, aside from hanging people in the nation's capital, in our temple of democracy, what does that look like electorally? What does that look like? There are no answers.
Notice, Seth, that the GOP now, balking at the $1.3 trillion COVID bailout, are retreating once again to the national budget, the debt. Remember 4 or 5 years ago? That's what they stood for until Trump gave all the tax cuts to the billionaires. And then once again, they're retreating inside this classic Republican shell when it comes to bailing out real people.
I don't think it's going to play. I
Yep.
think the answer to that is you know what? You had your chance.
Mm-hmm.
You had your chance to show us what you guys are all about. And you know what? Thank you. We saw.
Yeah.
I mean, tax cuts for billionaires to turn them into trillionaires. That's fabulous.
You know something, Seth? I think that idea, we should run that by the Lincoln Party, because it's a great idea for a commercial. Yeah, and of course, they make the best commercials on the planet now. But the idea that we saw what you stood for, it's a great line. You could make a wonderful commercial around it.
Yep.
We saw what you stood for. We've seen it now. We know what you stand for.
Yep.
And maybe
absolutely,
when they fight it out with the Patriot Party, maybe that's you and I should work on ideas for them. Not that they need it, but
how hard could it be to do it ourselves?
Yeah, they have the horsepower. These people are good, Seth. They are good. They are brilliant at messaging.
So it's similar to the thing they ran for Josh Hawley, right?
Right.
With the people whispering in the background, you almost made it.
I know.
You had your chance.
Who are these people? I once worked with a guy named Scott Miller for David Sawyer doing the presidential political ads for Democrats, a hot company. And Mandy, what's her last name? She was Clinton's head of media. Grunwald, her name was Mandy Grunwald, and I worked with them. And these are two of the smartest people I have ever met in my life.
Yeah.
They were brilliant. And I'm sure back there in the Lincoln Party, and they're mulling around. I think they were geniuses. And
the thing is, they have a genius at public relations and putting things together, because that's the language they speak.
Yes.
So when they speak that language that they're immersed in, and it's a language that we play blood sport in, we have this tremendous admiration for them. I was thinking about, that the rationale for developing a Lincoln Party to attract never Trumpers and what is now, the Bush wing of the party, which they're now calling rhinos, which is just an obscenity. But, how is it that Trump is the only person in the world that could have made George Herbert Walker Bush and his dad sympathetic characters? How is Dick Cheney and Caspar Weinberger now, how are they sympathetic characters?
Yeah.
How do they represent how is Jeb Bush a victim? It's beyond my ability to understand modern politics.
Mm-hmm.
But if Donald Trump, the objective is to offer a landing spot for never Trumpers and traditional GOP people. and to open a door and say, hey, there's a room inside this third party for you to find a home. And also, hey, any Democrat that's not an AOC fan, if a more moderate governing class of Democrats, this would be the governing class party. Well, I think that conversation has changed because the objective of that is to further shatter a GOP. But if the GOP is shattering itself with the starting of a MAGA party or a Patriot party, and you have an actual third party that would be legislatively neutered, because in our system of government, we don't award any legislative seats for second place. We have to take all elections. You get executive authority and legislative authority by winning a majority in a house and voting, and there's no power sharing. So I think now the argument starts, there has to be a Lincoln caucus within the Democratic Party that would be a safe landing spot for these people, to attract them to a Democratic Party that they wouldn't otherwise join, because they think of it as that one umbrella under AOC, Bernie, etc., and not under Biden and the governing branch. It's interesting. You go to an inauguration.
Explain to me what's happening in Portland, because that is bizarre. I mean, I think the idea of being hands off, BLM hands off, has proved to be a wonderful tactic. But Portland, holy shit.
It seems to be a regional hotspot of protest that has all sorts of regional angers and issues that people on the extreme left are agitated by in that part of the world. It also seems to be a landing spot for similarly minded people. And it's unfortunate because it becomes painted by, Trump state media as what the Democratic Party is, when it's not. You and I represent the major thinking of the Democratic Party. You're way more left than I am, not because of our differing current political views, but because of the way we were raised. You would think that I would be much more liberal than I actually am.
Well, it's hard to say there, Seth. I think we're very much on the same page. I mean, my grandson is called Snow Coyote Bjorn, which means bear in Sweden. That could only be the result of somebody growing up in Princeton in the 60s. The ultimate result,
Or Park Slope in 1971. I mean, without question. Without question. But to be fair, Jack, if you look at my street that I lived on, and within a 10-block radius, those people that were in that shitty neighborhood where brownstones were $5,000 and $10,000 each in 1966, those people have grown up to be some of the greatest thinkers of our generation.
I agree.
Two blocks away from me, and a guy that I went to school with was the Metro editor of the New York Times. Adam Yauch from the Beastie Boys was in my tent in camp in 1978 at Camp Onus. It goes on, and that small part of the world was responsible, that liberal thinking that we raised those, that those kids, including me, were raised in, had an impact on Western civilization later. It's just one of those things when somebody wants to know, how did that happen to Princeton, Jack? What the fuck happened to Princeton?
Well, just like, and in a way, that's a wonderful question, because when I started there in 1962, I fucking hated it. It was preppy, football player, Madras jacket, paisley tied, entitled, spoiled bitches for the most part. Okay? Rich families. I fucking hated it. That's why I spent 2 years there, an unsuccessful 2 years. And then eventually, over the decades, I'm sure it's become quite liberal and a much better school because it was an Ivy League school. And Princeton was interesting because I watched this process happening. You had the students and the preppies, high school preppies, who went to private school, like I did.
Well, unfortunately, oh, you dropped out for just a sec. I think maybe your signal got blocked out.
Okay, there were preppies, and then there were the greasers, were the Italian kids that sat on the wall across from the bowling alley. Mickey Babs, Monk Toussaint, The Hag, Caldonia. Oh, good, these were tough boys. I knew both crowds, and I watched in the late 60s, in the mid 60s, when these guys were the ones who supplied the preppies with their dope, so with their marijuana. So everybody started getting along. Everybody was being threatened by being drafted to go to Vietnam. And all of a sudden, these two disparate groups came together as the youth who hated the establishment.
Now, Jack, let me ask you a question. Is it during this time that Ted Cruz went to Princeton?
No, it was later.
Later.
He's younger than I am. God, what an asshole. So
Yeah.
Anyway, now that we're free-forming, I want to put this up, Seth, for our viewers. Do you want to run that, Seth?
Yeah, of course.
I love this.
What do we got here? All right, let me take me down. I'm going to take you down.
Okay. So what this is a picture of an SAS English soldier with, I think it's a Barrett, because I just don't think you see the clip clearly.
Yep. Can you see the muzzle brake?
Yes, with a little camo on the end, like claws.
Yep. So if it's a kind of a chevron muzzle brake, that would be a Barrett. But I don't know if that is, buddy, because it seems like it's got that kind of Remington 700. Now let's see the clip.
Okay. Well, hang on 1 second. We're going to do this. Yes, it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see the clip, but I still think, hang on.
Yeah, make it smaller. Make it smaller so I can see the bottom of the receiver.
Make it smaller.
Make it smaller.
I'm working on it. Okay. So, anyway, this guy manages to kill 5 people with one shot. And you ask yourself, Seth's thing was, they were in single file. It's exactly what I thought. Nope, they weren't. The guy in the front was wearing an explosive vest.
That's incredible.
Now, that's at 3,000 feet, which is a pretty good shot. That's so I just thought that was an interesting news item, but that maybe is just me, Seth.
No, I dig it, man. I love those kind of funny things. I do have a plug, though. If you'll join us on Wednesday, on Wednesday's show, we will be joined by legendary sci-fi writer-director of the Toxic Avenger, Joe Ritter. Joe Ritter will be joining us on the show. He's a viewer. He also lives in Brooklyn Heights, and he is going to be telling us about where the Toxic Avenger property stands now. The Toxic Avenger, a film from the early 80s, a cult classic, The Toxic Avenger. If you've seen it, you already love it. And I'd like to give a plug to our friends at Morse's Sauerkraut. Go and see Cody at Morse's Sauerkraut. It's in, I believe, Waldoboro, Maine. I think it's still Waldoboro. It's not that far off of Route 1 from the Moody's Diner intersection. Morse's Sauerkraut is a place where you can get most of the things that you would buy at a Sahadi's on Atlantic Avenue or an old Dean and DeLuca. You remember Dean and DeLuca, don't you, Jack, from New York?
Sure.
Yeah, and it's a gourmet. It's a gourmet store, and I I love those guys. It's a new couple that bought it from the Morse family. They bought it a couple of years ago, and they have spectacular charcuterie and cheese and spices from around the world. They have a huge Belgian beer collection. And it's just this hidden jewel in the middle of the country in Maine. And Morse's is a fabulous place. If you do go, tell them Seth and Jack sent you. That is good for exactly nothing.
What would it be good for, Seth?
I don't know, a pickle or something like that.
Oh,
They make awesome pickles. Do you like pickles, Jack?
I do, but I like cornichon much better.
Me too. Oh, God, aren't cornichon great?
Oh,
God, delicious.
With pate, cornichon and pate has to be one of the most delicious. It rates up there, not as all the way up with really good Peking duck.
Oh, did I ever tell you about? I was sitting out after a shift. I was working in a restaurant, and there was I said, I'm going to New York. I'm going to Flushing for dim sum. And the guy says, if you're going to Flushing, underneath the elevated train is one of those little hole in the wall shops and a little mall under the train station. And they're like little booths filled with like different Chinese places. On the street, there is a window, and the guy makes little rice flour pancakes, and he puts Peking duck in the pancake, scallions and brown sauce. He drizzles on top, and you get a little hand pancake, $3.
So notice one of our users who refuses to identify themselves, calling us foodie snobs. Oh, you damn snobs.
You damn snobs. I'm interested in what possibly could have been snobbery about Morse's Sauerkraut, a local business we're trying to support here, and how that's snobbery. I'm interested. Either that, or are they saying I'm a snob for going to Flushing instead of regular Chinatown?
So I want to hear who it is that mentioned that. I want to see a name attached to this, you pussy.
Well, let's wait and see, shall we? You know, I was thinking that, you think about, what it is that we do at this show that, that a lot of other people don't, because we don't have any commercial concerns or.
Shall I bring out the NyQuil bottle again and do a?
No, I was just thinking that, the only thing that we do that's different than other shows is we try to give perspective in a time when definitions and languages are changing, as we go along. This show reminds me of that class that I took. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Martha. Martha saying, what? Discerning palates, and appreciation of food and talent. Thank you, Martha. Martha and I are members of a Facebook group called Put That on Your Plate. And we take pictures of what we cook, and we put it up, and we exchange ideas from around the world with other people.
Okay.
No, we don't do that, Jack.
Let's talk about football. No, let's not. No. Like you said.
Go ahead.
Not about to talk about football.
No. Did you hear that Rudy G is being sued by Dominion?
For $1.3 billion.
1.3 extra large.
Oh my God, Seth, this is brilliant because Trump owes over $1 billion, and Rudy's going to be sued for more. How perfect!
Let me ask you a question. Do you think he made that much, charging Trump $20,000 a day?
He never got paid.
Fabulous.
Oh, Rudy is going to go down in flames faster than the big stupid is. I really believe he's going to be disbarred. He's going to be sued. Somebody's going to bitch slap him on the street. He doesn't have protection, does he?
It's amazing, man. I mean, it seems to me like the very same people, I said this the other day, the very same people that tell us that there's no climate change are the same people that, tell us that voting machines are rigged and that there should be another Trump administration. These are the same people. It's like 40 degrees outside. There's no ice on lakes in Maine. Nobody can go snowmobiling.
Right.
You know? There's no ski industry in the United States anymore.
Right.
You know,
In the Northeast, there isn't.
right. But apparently we're getting closer to the sun or something. It can't possibly be because of the Koch brothers processing petroleum products. You know, it couldn't possibly be that, could it?
I want to talk about, magic markers.
Love them.
Okay. Now, I have been on a perpetual 20-year search for the magic marker that works the best and doesn't dry up. And I have found them. It's not this, whatever this is.
Is that a Sharpie?
If you go to the hardware store or even at Lowe's, and I won't mention the other one because they're Trumpers, go to Lowe's, you can find these Sharpies that have a black cap and a red stalk here. Those are the best Sharpies you can buy. They will write on anything. They won't come off once it's on. So let me just throw that out to you guys because I want to start a thing which says the best products you can buy.
I love that.
That's so you don't spend all your money on this cheap shit.
We were talking about that this morning, weren't we, Bud? I mean, I got half a dozen, silicone spatulas for $13 on Amazon, and they're, and they don't hold the smell of the detergent, so you can cook food without smelling like soap.
Yeah.
I'll give you the product review soon, by the way.
Absolutely, but I think it's important, and there should be a YouTube channel. And you know what? It should not a YouTube channel. Sorry, a Facebook page. How companies have fucked you. And you just put an art because most companies are out to fuck you. It's the end of story. Wrapping, for instance. I get packages of shit that if I don't have a Swiss Army knife, I can't open. And maybe the package contains the perfect instrument for opening the package, but you can't get to it because you can't open the fucking thing. Okay? So this is a Facebook page talking about all the companies that have screwed you. And it's not the usual ones. It's not the airlines, which will screw you up, down, and center.
Yeah.
For any, that's where the rubber meets the road. I'm talking about the small people, the company you call their answering service, and you can't get out of the endless recursive loop.
Yeah.
I had that experience with Maritime Farms. They didn't give you all the options. If you didn't know who you're going to talk to, you couldn't do anything. Okay.
I can't. I used to be a high-level executive there. I can't talk about it.
Well, Maritime. Yeah. I mean, please.
Yeah,
please. I mean, it makes
open up a lot of business for them.
It makes me so angry the way customers are treated. And they use this. I was trying to talk to Spectrum the other day, to their automatic answering machine. It's like talking to a 2-year-old. You clearly enunciate a number, and goddamn if they don't get one of them wrong. And so you have to re-loop and retry it. Eventually you have to type it in because the voice recognition isn't there yet for them. It is so frustrating. And this is how companies fuck you.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, once again, we talk about the technology that connects us all. And it certainly, it's like if you go to order anything online now, you look at the number of stars in the review, and then you look at the reviews themselves to see if they seem like they were machine generated or generated by somebody in, Wuhan, like using English, and trying to communicate an idea. But yeah,
And talking about reviews, Seth, that real estate lady with a private jet coming to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
The reviews she's getting on Yelp now.
And the My Pillow company too.
Yep. They might as well just shut their doors.
Yeah. And you know what? Honestly, okay, Mike Lindell, we were 2 weeks ago. One of our themes was addiction mentality and victimhood in thinking about the political processes in the United States. And, I'm sorry, but there are some people that go through addiction recovery that, there are different ways that you can go through recovery. And sometimes people become fixated on a new addiction. And Mike Lindell's new addiction is Jesus. Mike Lindell is a very evangelical, Trumpist kind of guy. And he simply replaced his drug addiction with a different thing to obsess about. And it turned into Donald Trump. He fixated on the authoritarian personality disorder that he also suffers from, and projected all of his shit on that. He's, I've heard it said to me and I've said it. You're not an asshole because you're addicted. You're addicted because a part of you is an asshole, and you have to fix that. And until you fix your inner asshole, you're not going to be able to deal with the other shit, And that's who this guy is, this Mike Lindell. It's the same thing. Anyway, it goes back to another theme that we were talking about. So I figured it was worth raising because we've already covered that ground, and Mike Lindell certainly is an example of that.
Well, when he showed up at the White House, I mean, that image of, I don't know if I made it up or I saw it, of Mike Pence running down the hallway holding a pillow, running toward the Oval Office. I think of that absolutely wonderful scene in The Sopranos where Tony, his mother, has basically betrayed him with the restaurant owner and badmouthed him. So the restaurant owner is coming after him, and he gets to the clinical wing of the old people's home, and he's walking down the corridor, and there's a gurney with a pillow on it, and he's walking down to his mother's room, who's down at the end of the hall, and he picks up the pillow and just keeps on walking. Who writes this shit? So I mean,
in that case, David Chase.
Oh, absolutely.
Brilliant.
And remember when Mikey is in the hospital, he's been shot, and he's lying there, and he's got a morphine drip with a button on it, and Tony's wife is in there telling him about God, and you can see him just frantically hitting the button for the morphine drip.
Oh. I had a good friend. I had a good friend, and this good friend was 100% in the mob. And when the show comes on the air, and he says to me, I was talking with one of my friends, and this guy said, "What do they have, a fucking microphone in my house?" How accurate the show is.
Well, Big Paul Castellano, they figured out that all the dealings were in the kitchen. So what they did is they managed to somehow make the lamp not work that was sitting on the kitchen table against the wall. So they sent it out for repairs, put the bug in it, and that's how they discovered that he was having it off with the South American maid, the little South American maid that was working there, and he had to go for surgery to keep it up. And this is how they found out all about that, as well as all the conversations with his.
It's funny, that, and it's funny how technology made that kind of underworld gangsterism obsolete.
Yeah.
It's different now.
It is.
There's different gangs. There's still gangs, but it's different now. It's vastly different now. There's nobody that runs New York the way Sammy the Bull Gravano ran New York.
Right. The other thing is there's no need for Cockney rhyming slang anymore in London. It's a different animal. And this show on Netflix about, which I've been watching, about spying is very interesting. First they do eavesdropping, then they do cameras, and then they do sex compromat, which of course the East Germans were there was a guy there I'm surprised they didn't mention Putin. There was a guy there by the name of Wolf. He was East German who ran the Stasi, and he was an absolute genius at sex and secrets, but it's a really interesting show that I'm interested in it because I'm a gearhead, so I'm really fascinated by sort of what they're doing. But it's worth watching if you want to.
You know, I used to be an absolute genius at sex, and then I got married.
Well, for me, the sex and the genius were separate things. The genius referred to the to the cameras and the listening device. And I said on the last show, that thing with the exploding parachute that let the water drain, carry the wires.
I watched it, by the way. That was a real crazy, description. It really was. I'm like, how do they fucking think? Can you think about a job cooler than that? Figuring out ways with people.
My God!
Like what we do every day if we got paid for it.
Yeah, it's Rube Goldberg, and the thing worked. Can you imagine the smile on his face when those two little wires came out the drain pipe?
And then there's the U.S. nuclear sub that went periodically to load new cartridges in the listening device that they put in the transatlantic cable that the Soviets put into use on the ocean floor. Just like they would have naval divers dive out, walk on the surface, walk on the floor of the ocean, find the pipe, find the place where they made the incision, pull out the listening cassette that they put in a fresh one, download the information, and go. I mean, this like spycraft from the digital age is so much different, we offer it all to everybody. And as we were talking the other day about the way in which the human brain works now, as opposed to, the way our analog brains worked before. But one thing kind of remains true, and that is if you're going to be able to analyze any kind of political perspective or be able to digest the news or be able to act in any way, in any element of life, but it's really useful to talk about it in the context of politics. If you're on the extreme left or the extreme right, and we were talking about this the other day, and it was an interesting conversation, so I want to rehash it. If you're on the extreme right, your thinking is based primarily out of fear. You're a fear-based thinker, and that engenders a lot of anger as well. And we see that in the public space with the Trumpists and their willingness to adopt a single news pipeline, their resistance to other information, which is outside information. People on the left, on the extreme left, also are particularly angry people. And they spend a lot of time expressing anger and frustration and rage that things can't be the way I want them to be, Both of those emotional states make it impossible to use the one thing that you need now more than ever to be able to interpret information, and that is your intuition. You should interact with your intellect to be able to make you see things for what they really are. And I found that fascinating, that the commonality between the left and the right is an inability to, from my experience, an inability to use one's intuition and to develop that sense of emotional intelligence that we've spent so much time talking about, the EQ IQ deficit in this equation.
Okay, let me go back a little. There have been studies decades ago on how television affects the brain. Obviously, advertisers are very interested in this, as well as everyone else. And I think it was shown, I'm not up to date on this, it's been shown that watching television bypasses parts of the brain, analytic parts of the brain. If this is in fact the case, and you have three generations that were brought up on television as educators, then it's not surprising if some of these functions that are bypassed tend to atrophy. And
It's interesting because you're surrounded, Jack, by a technology that encourages that continued atrophy.
yes,
But also exaggerates the emotional states that contribute to that atrophy.
right. Now the internet is different because the internet demands a certain amount of action from the viewer just to stay entertained. So I wonder if there's something about the internet that tends to dampen this phenomena, because classically television viewing is single duplex. It just goes one way. Of course, it's really been likened to a hypnotic state. Whereas the internet is very different in a way than that because it demands a certain back and forth.
I think that there's going to be a forced personal transparency in our lives really soon because of this. I think we're all going to have a whole lot fewer secrets. I think that we're going to start to see different iterations of what China is already doing with your cultural credit score, which allows you to have certain jobs or prevents you from having certain jobs based on how you refer to the Chinese government, what type of citizen you are, what your attitude is. Are you a good team player? Do you pay your bills on time? Which of course has zero to do with whether you're a good person or not. But they want
explain to people because you obviously watched that part of the show that talked about China.
Yeah.
Explain that to our viewers. I'll be right back.
So, hi, Jeff. How are you, buddy? And Martha says, sadly. We're talking about a technology state, literally a state that employs technology, facial recognition, behavioral technologies, to be able to track its citizens, to be able to quantify those citizens, to reward those citizens or punish those citizens. And my question is, how far are we from that state here now? And I'd like you maybe just to consider your web browsing history and which companies get a chance to see what it is that you search for, how your brain works, what porn you like, what your kinks are, what that says about you intellectually, and Jeff, some people are good, some people aren't good. Some people have no VPN. But even if you do have a VPN, what does your browsing history say about you? Right?
So, in terms of China, when I watched that, I had one thought, and as I'm sure you've already explained, it's amazing how much information they assemble about a human being. And remember, we always thought the United States was going to go over and go throughout the world distributing democracy, and that eventually the world would become more like the United States. Wrong. The world is becoming more like China, and that includes the United States because of this being able, face recognition, Facebook, social media, blah, blah, blah. It's an endless thing, credit score. The United States is becoming more like China.
I have heard this before, and I remember an article in the second best magazine ever to exist, Spy Magazine, founded by our friend Graydon Carter, who went on to be the editor at Vanity Fair. Graydon Carter, in Spy Magazine, there was an article about how the U.S. has turned into the USSR and the USSR has turned into the U.S. Well, so Jeff is saying they use quant for searches and they don't track your history allegedly. They're inferring things about us, Jeff, based on all that metadata that that is collected, in my opinion. And so now the big bogeyman in our geopolitical life is China. China, who just this past year exceeded us in international investment. So you raise a good point. The other question is, does China then culturally influence us? Because I do see some of the governmental controls that China uses integrating their way into our lives. I see zero Chinese culture aside from culinary integrating itself into our lives. Instead, I see American culture being replicated in China.
No, I would disagree 100%. What you're seeing is Chinese robotic technology, and
Right.
Chinese technology and spying. Okay, let's just keep it on the electronic cyber.
Right. No, so the question is, who is becoming who?
Yes, we are becoming, our government is becoming more like the Chinese government than their government becoming more like us. I'm not talking about the popular culture.
Yeah.
It's the power doesn't lie in the popular culture.
You're saying the way, and what I would say is it's less the U.S. government and more industry that is starting to mimic China.
It's the military, industrial, congressional complex, which is a word that Eisenhower had in his speech, but apparently they forced him to delete it.
Sure, the legislators did.
Yes.
Yeah, they went to his office. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about the way in which the system saved us. People within the system who took an oath saved us. And people you wouldn't expect to save us saved us. That's really great.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it was the system saving itself. Maybe the system is a thinking system, you know? Maybe the system is so complex that it's a thinking system and it has ways to salvage itself, which are built into the system, like white blood cells. Like Ducey is a white blood cell in Arizona, and the governor of the Secretary of State in Georgia is a white blood cell, and the people in the DOJ are white blood cells because they wouldn't let this guy fire Rosenberg, which is a phenomenal story. A phenomenal story. The thing at the DOJ. Did you hear Neil Katyal this morning, Jack?
No.
Says it's the most monumental thing to happen in DOJ in 50 years.
No kidding.
No kidding. A coup in the DOJ by a schmuck who runs the civil division of the CIA, going around the acting head of the DOJ, not the CIA, going around the attorney general to get to the president to form a coup, to start another coup in Georgia.
The thing is that what swayed Trump in his unbelievable ignorance was the fact that everybody in the DOJ threatened to resign at the same time.
Yep.
And that scandal, he thought, was a worse outcome than getting rid of the attorney general.
And now we are all set to wait until Cy Vance and Letitia James announce their indictments of this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Or this guy hops a flight out of town. Don't forget, there are criminal charges coming about. And maybe of all the things that we should be talking about, we didn't spend any time this morning talking about how unbelievably fucking competent the Biden administration has been, both in front of the camera and behind the camera.
Let me say one thing, Seth. I thought of this when you were talking about how the system saved itself. We're not used to it. But in general, we have hundreds of the best and brightest
Yep.
working at the top of the government
Yep.
and the Pentagon and the CIA and the NSA. We have, and the FBI, we have the smartest people in the United States at the top of government.
God
We've
bless these
sort of-
people, man.
We've sort of forgotten that
Yep.
with Trump's list of clowns and assholes and grifters that he's put in there. And now that it's starting to stabilize again, and all of a sudden we're seeing this enormous brain horsepower, they are in fucking trouble.
Isn't that great?
It's wonderful. It's just,
And in the past week, yeah, you know what, Martha? I hope the Mueller report makes a resurgence too. I think it will. I tell you what, Martha, as much as I hate the phrase, why don't we put a tack in that for right now? Because we're going to have to come back to it when it comes out. Sealed indictments, who knows? Who knows? I mean, that could be crazy person talking, and if so, I'll happily admit it. Or it could be, sorry, Jeff, not Martha, Jeff, who said the Mueller report.
and also the thing the Mueller report left out, which is the financial conspiracy.
Right.
Letitia, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as if there weren't enough people lining up to drain these guys' pockets. You know, it's long time coming. But you know, it occurred to me, Jack, that the political competence of the Biden administration and their chief of staff and the ability to interface with legislative leadership in exactly the right ways is something that we haven't read a goddamn story about it. We haven't seen a fucking thing about it. But yesterday I was watching the morning shows, and the former head of the Progressive Caucus in the United States Congress said on Sunday morning television, I think he had a hell of a first week. I think Biden had a hell of a first week, especially on the things that progressives value. The executive orders were fantastic, and I'm very excited to work with them in the future. Bernie Sanders separately said, let's give him a chance. We are going to hold Joe accountable to progressive principles. But Bernie said, we're going to push him as much as we can. But he just got started. Let's give him a chance. I think he's doing great. Now that says that in the Senate and in the Congress, someone finally has cracked the fucking whip and gotten everybody marching to the same beat. You don't hear about it in the newspapers. You don't see it in articles. What you read between the lines. And that means that everybody who is not a Trumper is behind Biden to get done the stuff that he needs to get done. That means that if you ask me what I think that could result in, we are going to see the nuclear option on the filibuster. And what's going to happen is you're going to see Mitch McConnell lose the rest of his power, and he has to. Otherwise, Mitch McConnell is going to jam up Joe Biden procedurally for his entire time in office, and he's being absolutely transparent about it. So what he's hoping is he pushes Democrats into this position. They pull the trigger. They do the nuclear option on majority votes in the Senate, and we can finally move along.
And then ranked choice voting and Citizens United being overturned.
Yep.
We've got some momentum down the highway.
You got to do it in the first 2 years, because if they recapture the House, it's over.
Yep.
So once again, you know, I think we're going to have, this has been the most fascinating time for people like Norm Ornstein, the political scientist, to be working, and for people like us to be fanboys of the American political system and to comment on it. Because I think people will be studying this for centuries to come, if there are people in centuries to come, because climate change is going to fundamentally change everything that you and I take for granted.
So we have two big things going on here, Seth. One is climate change, which leads to mass migration, wars, starvation, a million different huge factors. And then we have the government being able to identify, understand, and program um, this new citizen of the world. You have those two things. How do they in the future play out against each other? Because they're very big things.
I got to be honest, I'm at a loss.
Well, if you weren't, I would be surprised
Yeah.
because
I mean, it's a
the
big
fact,
question, isn't it?
yes, and so to do the Bucky Fuller thing, describe the universe and give two examples.
Right.
You could say, what is the paradigm shift that's going to change this in ways we never expected?
You know what? It could be.
Time's up. Sorry, just kidding.
It could be. It could easily be mass migrations of humans as climate change makes food scarcity a bigger issue globally.
Mhm.
I think you're gonna see displacement of large numbers of human beings, not the least of which are the ones that live in equatorial Africa. And also, we talk about the position that China is in, food wise. We're in pretty good shape. I mean, unless you live in Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Texas. But we're in good shape, specifically you and I, because we live in Maine. We're in great shape. We sit on one of two water rich regions in the United States, the other one, ironically, Portland, Oregon, of the Pacific Northwest. But you would really be hard pressed not to look outside over these past two winters and say that Maine of 2021 doesn't have the climate of southern New Jersey in 1965.
Mhm.
That's a 600-mile move, man. And the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any other body of water on the planet. And
Mhm.
that is happening simultaneously with an industrial food manufacturing and delivery system that is basically humming right along and feeding the number of billion humans that are on the planet right now. But that's not a guarantee. That doesn't work in perpetuity. And we have to figure out a way around this, because unless you can store 30 years worth of rice in your basement, or afford it for that matter, or protect it, group play is going to have to be a thing that we get better at. And these Republicans are not the people that we can do it with. The number of existential issues that will be driving the electorate in the future, we haven't begun to scratch the surface with authoritarian populism. And if you think people are scared now, you wait until they can't fill up the tank or get food or water.
Isn't it interesting? I tend to look at the coronavirus as another life form who, and that life form inevitably mutates and develops to become a stronger life form and therefore not to go extinct. That's what life does. Look at the speed with which it changes for survival. Look at the speed of the mutation, Seth. And this is just another animal that's mutating to survive.
Yeah.
But it's not 3 billion years to crawl out of the sea here. It's
Yeah.
more like 2 months to mutate into something that's much more survivable.
It's interesting how wrong predictions can be as well, isn't it? 20 years later.
Mhm.
Like if you think about, what were the certainties of the thinking people, of the thinking ecologists of the 1970s. The one thing that we couldn't hear enough about, the one thing that everybody was talking about, was population explosion. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
Birth rates are going through the floor. We're going to see in the next few years, we're going to see I've got 2 grown children. Nobody's got a boyfriend. Nobody's got a girlfriend. Nobody's having babies this year. Nobody's getting married. This disease is making people scared to even talk to each other in person.
Remember that in the 50s and 60s, they said nuclear power would make work irrelevant and unnecessary?
Yeah. Well, it did in Chernobyl. Just ask Moscow Mitch.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I mean it did. Go to Pripyat in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine or Belarus? Ukraine. Ukraine? Pripyat? Ukraine? Maybe.
You'd be better equipped to answer that than I am.
I know that it's a couple of 100 miles away from my grandmother's village, which is, on the outer zone of places where people are born without liver cancer.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing how that one event destroyed the Soviet Union. Just amazing. Mm-hmm. They almost killed the world with their stupidity.
Yeah, and the Swedes there are going, ooh, super duper duper duper. What is that reading?
Yeah,
we're getting
right. Now they got a whole generation of people born with blonde eyes and blue hair.
Yeah, I hate when that happens, and they're so good looking.
Yeah.
It's excruciating.
Nothing on that, blonde eyes and blue hair.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's more like Portland, Oregon.
It's the Führer's master race in reverse.
Yes. Well, I think we've probably done it for today, but tune in on Wednesday and we'll tell you how the Führer is doing.
Yes, everybody, let's make sure to go out and support our friends over at Morse's Sauerkraut. Thank them for being interested in the show, and we'll come up with other phony ads later on.
See you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.